On July 24, 2025, an Antonov An-24 passenger plane, operated by Angara Airlines, was on approach to the airport in Tinder, a remote city in Russia's far east. It never made it. The aircraft, carrying 48 people, disappeared from radar before slamming into a rugged, mountainous landscape. There were no survivors. This wasn't just another plane crash. It was a blaring warning siren. The plane that fell from the sky was a nearly 50-year-old relic of the Soviet Union, kept in service out of pure desperation. But this tragedy wasn't some freak accident. It was a symptom of a much larger disease, one born from sanctions, isolation, and a crumbling industrial base. The crash of Flight 2311 wasn't a random event. It was the inevitable price of a system flying on borrowed time. So how did Russia's once proud aviation industry get to this point? How was a global power forced to fly what many now call death traps long after they should have been in museums? To really get this crisis, you have to understand the Antonov An-24. First designed in the late 1950s, this twin turboprop plane is anything but modern. But it's a beast, rugged, reliable, and able to operate in some of the most unforgiving places on Earth. Nicknamed the Flying Tractor, the An-24 became the workhorse of regional travel across the vast, empty expanses of Siberia and the Russian Far East. For countless remote communities, these planes aren't a luxury. They're the only lifeline for essential supplies, medical care, and travel where roads are a fantasy and railways are a distant dream. That's why even today, dozens of these old planes are still flying. They're a critical piece of Russia's infrastructure. The problem? They were never meant to fly forever. Most airliners are put out to pasture after 25 to 30 years. The An-24 that crashed was nearly 50, and yet, in what can only be called a profound display of wishful thinking, its airworthiness certificate had been extended to 2036. And this wasn't a one-off. Facing a crippling shortage of planes, Russian authorities have been methodically extending the service lives of old Soviet aircraft like the An-24 and the Yak-40, pushing them towards 60 years of service, double what they were designed for. This decision has turned these workhorses into ticking time bombs. The event that pushed this fragile situation into a full-blown crisis was the wave of Western sanctions in 2022. Overnight, Russia's aviation industry, which had become deeply dependent on Western tech, was cut off at the knees. Before the sanctions, over 80% of Russia's commercial fleet was made up of foreign Airbus and Boeing jets. These planes weren't just bought from the West, they were tied into a global network for maintenance, software, and most importantly, spare parts. The sanctions blew up those connections. Boeing and Airbus stopped supplying new planes, support, and parts. Leasing companies, who owned a huge chunk of Russia's fleet, demanded their planes back. Russia essentially nationalized hundreds of these jets, which kept them in the air but also made them international pariahs. The immediate effect was chaos. The long-term effect is a slow, grinding decay of the entire aviation system. With no official way to get new parts, maintenance is a nightmare. Reports have surged of airlines cannibalizing grounded planes, stripping them for components to keep others flying. It's a dangerous game of musical chairs that only kicks the can down a rapidly shortening road. The consequences of this isolation are now impossible to miss. Since 2022, the number of plane safety incidents in Russia has exploded. According to one report, incidents tripled in a single year, climbing to over 180 malfunctions in 2023 from 60 the year before. And these aren't small problems. We're talking engine fires, landing gear failures, and sudden cabin depressurizations. Internal documents show just how deep the rot goes. Russia's own transport ministry agency, Rostransnadzor, discovered over 2,000 flights had been operated using parts that were past their expiration date. In a chilling directive, the flagship carrier Aeroflot reportedly told flight attendants not to log in-flight malfunctions without the captain's explicit permission, a clear attempt to hide flaws to keep aging, problem-ridden planes in service. The Angora Airlines An-24 that crashed was a perfect case study of this systemic failure. That specific plane had a documented history of technical issues, including a generator failure, a damaged wing from rolling off a runway, and a radio malfunction just months before its final, fatal flight. Despite this track record, it was repeatedly deemed safe to fly. For people in Russia's remote regions, getting on a plane has become an act of faith. They see the worn-out cabins and hear the rattling frames, knowing they're boarding relics from another time. This crisis is a tangled mess of geopolitics, engineering, and human costs. Understanding all of it is crucial. If you're getting value from this analysis, think about subscribing and hitting the notification bell. It helps us keep doing these deep dive investigations, and you'll be the first to know when our next report drops. Facing a fleet that was aging into oblivion, the Kremlin announced a bold plan: import substitution. Russia would build its own modern airliners and finally free itself from the West. The government kicked off an ambitious program to produce over 1,000 homegrown planes by 2030. Focused on two main projects, the MC-21, meant to rival the Boeing 737 and Airbus A320, and a Russified Sukhoi Superjet. On paper, it was a declaration of technological independence. In reality, the program has been a disaster of delays and failures. The initial goal to deliver dozens of new planes by 2024 fell embarrassingly short. The hard truth is that even these Russian planes were packed with Western parts. The original MC-21, for instance, had to have about 80% of its equipment swapped out for Russian-made alternatives, from its engines and avionics down to the hydraulics and cabin interior. Developing all of that from scratch has been a monumental task. The deadlines just keep slipping. MC-21 deliveries once promised for 2024 are now optimistically slated for 2025, or more likely 2026. As of mid-2025, not a single new domestically produced aircraft had been delivered to an airline except for a few superjets cobbled together from pre-sanctions parts. Production targets have been slashed. The Irkutsk aviation plant admits it can only build 36 MC-21s a year right now, a tiny fraction of what's needed. The grand plan has stalled, leaving airlines with no choice but to keep their 50-year-old flying tractors in the sky. If you want a preview of Russia's potential future, just look at Iran. For decades, Iran's aviation industry has been crippled by similar sanctions, forced to fly a dangerously old fleet of vintage Boeings and Airbuses. Their struggle is a grim look at what happens when a country's air sector is cut off from the world. More crashes, less safety, and a slow-motion collapse of air travel. Russia is now firmly on that same path. Its commercial fleet is shrinking. In 2024 alone, 58 aircraft were taken out of service, far more than were replaced. Experts warn that without a huge number of new planes, the country is facing a major decline in air service, which will isolate its remote regions even further. Because of issues like Russia illegally double-registering foreign-owned aircraft, the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, has identified a significant safety concern regarding the country's oversight. Meanwhile, the European Union has added 21 Russian airlines to its air safety list, citing that they no longer meet international safety standards. Even Russia's own statistics, which can be hard to trust, paint a grim picture. Before the full impact of the 2022 sanctions, Russia already had the highest number of plane crash fatalities in the world since the year 2000. Now, with maintenance standards compromised and a fleet held together by smuggled parts in pure hope, the risks are multiplying every single day. The crash of Angara Airlines Flight 2311 wasn't just a tragedy. It was the loudest warning yet of a systemic crisis spiraling out of control. It's what happens when geopolitical ambition crashes into the hard laws of engineering and geography. Russia is trapped. It can't buy new Western planes, and it can't build its own fast enough. It's forced to depend on a field of old Soviet aircraft that were never built to fly this long, maintained with dwindling parts and under immense pressure. Every extended airworthiness certificate, every flight on an expired part, every unreported problem is another spin of the roulette wheel. The system is living on